Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. On Tuesday night, the Senate passed a bill that would restrict solitary confinement in federal prisons. The federal government has committed to limiting the practice in the past, but this time Senator Kim Pate, the bill's co-sponsor, hopes the House of Commons will pass it into legislation, and solitary confinement is phased out once and for all. APTN's Fraser Needham has that story.
The bill is called S-230, or Tona's Law, after Tona Mills. And Senator Kim Pate had this to say about her at a press conference in Ottawa on Wednesday morning.
The horrific reality is this is an Indigenous woman who went through 10 years of isolation and then had to be in the mental health system for another almost 11 years and has been free and clear of the system for just less than 1 year and then diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so she said that she hopes before she dies she sees a law that would prohibit what happened to her.
The proposed legislation would require prison authorities to seek court approval to isolate an inmate longer than 48 hours, allow prisoners to seek reduced sentences or greater parole eligibility where segregation made their sentence harsher, and prohibit isolation for inmates dealing with mental health issues. According to statistics accompanying the bill, Indigenous people make up 44% of those in segregation, and Indigenous women 96% of females in segregation. Pate says her bill would build upon regulations in 1992's Corrections and Conditional Release Act.
At that time, it was a piece of human rights legislation aimed in particular at helping ensure that people who should not be in prison weren't there. Section 29 says people with mental health issues and health issues should be in health settings. This bill, Bill S-230, helps push that along.
The NDP's Blake Desjardins is the legislation's other co-sponsor. He says he is hoping for cross-party support so the bill can pass through the House as quickly as possible.
Solitary confinement doesn't work. It harms people. It creates a longer life of pain. We need to see a kind of future where our justice system is restoring people, is helping them reintegrate into community.
There is no date yet set when Bill S-230 will be introduced in the House of Commons. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Search of the landfill became a big topic in the city of Winnipeg over the past couple of years. An encampment that started in response to Winnipeg police not searching a landfill for the remains of 2 First Nations women will now soon come down. And the filings of a human rights complaint is also underway regarding that same landfill search. With more, here's T.R. Wheatley.
Camp Morgan, on its 2nd anniversary from when it first began, will put its fire out and shut down for good. It was set up near the city-owned Brady Landfill on the south side of Winnipeg on December 18, 2022. Just weeks after Winnipeg police announced Jeremy Skibitsky, who was already in custody for the murder of Rebecca Contois, was also being charged for killing Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and the yet-to-be-identified person given the name Buffalo Woman. Camp Morgan, of course, began as a response to Winnipeg police telling the families the remains of Harris and Myron ended up at the privately owned Prairie Green landfill north of the city, but a search was not feasible. Organizers committed to keeping the camp going until a search happened. After a 15-month political fight, both the federal and provincial governments committed a combined $40 million towards a search. Earlier this month, the physical search of the landfill began. In a Facebook post, Morgan's cousin Melissa Robinson said, quote, "It's only a matter of time now till we are able to bring Morgan home and lay her to rest properly," unquote. Meanwhile, Harris's daughter, Elle Harris, along with 2 other women, Robin Johnston and Susan Caribou, have filed a human rights complaint of discrimination against the city of Winnipeg for not conducting a search of both the Prairie Green and Brady landfills. The complaint says the city discriminated against Morgan Harris, Buffalo Woman, Tanya Nepanak, and all Indigenous women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA plus people and their families. Nepanak is believed to also be a victim of homicide. In 2012, Sean Lamb was charged in her murder, but the charges were stayed due to lack of evidence. The complaint has 18 reference points the city ignored, including, quote, "on the basis of our ancestry and sex without bona fide and reasonable cause," unquote. The city violated Section 13 of the Human Rights Code. So far, there has been no response from the city. This past August, the man responsible for Harris and the other 3 women's deaths was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for first-degree murder. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Mohawk community just outside of Montreal has little police presence due to years of tension between community members in both the provincial police and their own former police force. However, a non-police alternative, the Kaska Perimeter Security, is trying to provide a bridge between the community and police. APTN's Savannah Craig has that story.
Everybody's equipped with a body cam.
Kane Montour is getting ready to patrol his community of Kaska.
That boss.
It's a Mohawk community located just outside of Montreal.
We say it jokingly, people come here and they forget how to drive.
Montour is the coordinator of Kaska Perimeter Security.
As soon as they get here, they get into an accident.
He says he's trying to provide a safer community for the members of Kaska.
They won't call the SQ, they'll call us.
The KPS offers a non-police alternative for security and support to Mohawks of Kaska.
There's definitely an issue here with the SQ, the trust issues, with the RCMP, with, the government.
The lack of trust has intensified in the last few decades, culminating during the 1990 siege of Kaska and the burning of the Kaska Mohawk police station in 2015 after it was abandoned.
The aftermath of that is we don't have a police force.
But there's still issues being experienced in the community today.
You have stolen vehicles or unwanted people coming here because they think that it's a non-policed community, that anything can go here.
The KPS responds to a variety of issues alongside the provincial Sûreté du Québec officers, paramedics, and the fire department.
There's a bad taste in the mouth from, I guess, going back to 1990 with the SQ and their policing, and there's no in-between. People don't feel comfortable calling them sometimes, so they'll call us as like a mediator, because we can do almost everything except police.
Montour says racism can create a hesitancy for community members to call the provincial police.
I've had family members who are beaten for no reason. Myself, I've been harassed by SQ officers for doing absolutely nothing. Stereotyped, It's hard being an Ungwehue. It's hard being a Native person, when they see your ponytail, when they see you're from Kaska. And, racism, it's real, it's here.
Montour says the KPS is doing what it can to support community members and address the illegal dumping of waste in Kaska.
What we've been told to do is keep note of it, take down license plates, markings of the dump trucks, the drivers, where they go, where they're dumping.
Steve Douglas is the supervisor for the KPS.
That we're here for the community, and realistically, we are to enforce Mohawk law.
The KPS has limited powers.
But as far as giving out fines, stopping people and physically stopping people, we don't have that capability.
Many First Nations communities across Canada are looking to establish their own police force to replace Canada's provincial or federal police forces in their communities. Could the KPS become Kanasataga's next police force?
I don't know. I can't make that call. But right now, we're here, we're helping, we're doing what we can.
Savannah Craig, APTN National News, Kaska Mohawk Territory.
Earlier this year, the Kaska Nation appealed a Yukon Supreme Court decision on a proposed mining project on its asserted territory. In a decision released last week, the Yukon Court of Appeal sided with the Kaska that it hadn't been properly consulted about the project. Sarah Connors tells us the Kaska are calling it a big win.
The Ross River Dene Council is celebrating a recent court decision on BMC Minerals' proposed Kutsakaya mine. Yukon's Court of Appeal found that territorial and federal governments failed to consult the Kaska on the project's economic feasibility.
We felt the relief. We felt, happy with the Court of Appeal's decision.
The Ross River Dinna Council, on behalf of the Kaska Nation, appealed a Yukon Supreme Court decision released earlier this year. That decision found the governments mostly upheld their duty to consult the Kaska when approving the mine to the next stage in 2022. But the Kaska argued the judge erred in her decision. They said a lot was at stake during a rally in September when the appeal was heard.
The caribou that sustain us. That's why I'm here today.
The open pit copper, zinc, and lead project is located in a core area for the Fennelson caribou herd. But the governments refused to consult with the Kaska about the economic feasibility of the project, something they said would be discussed later on. However, the appeal court said that was unreasonable.
The economics of the whole project is, it brings a lot of uncertainty.
The appeal court ordered the governments to thoroughly consult with the Kaska about the project's economic feasibility before it can be approved. BMC Minerals says it's disappointed the project will be delayed, but respects the court's decision.
We've always been of the view that we want to have all the questions answered and everyone heard, especially Kaska.
Once the governments consult with the Kaska on the topic of economic feasibility, it will reissue a decision on whether or not the mine can proceed. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Dakota nations are upset with the modern-day treaty that's been signed between the federal government and the Manitoba Métis Federation. That story and more still to come. Welcome back. A new Senate report is calling on the federal government to establish an Indigenous human rights ombudsperson and tribunal. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
The Senate Committee on Indigenous Peoples released its report on Thursday morning in Ottawa. Senator Brian Francis is the chair of the committee. He says Indigenous people need a human rights regime that is more responsive to the needs of Indigenous people.
An Indigenous ombudsperson and human rights tribunal grounded in Indigenous knowledge, practices, and traditions, such as mediation and other forms of dispute resolution, would be better suited to bring justice to people and communities where it has been in short supply.
Senator David Arnott also says the Canadian Human Rights Commission and Tribunal in their current forms make it difficult for Indigenous people to pursue their rights due to high legal costs.
As a result, many would-be litigants can find themselves unable to make a complaint unless they have considerable means or can find counsel willing to do so for pro bono work.
In the past, organizations like the Assembly of First Nations have said Indigenous rights must be primarily defended by their elected governments and not by bodies like the Tribunal. But Senator Michelle Odette says there needs to be a balance where grassroots people can have their voices heard.
If we had a national inquiry, it's because grassroots people stood up and supported by many chiefs in Canada. So the balance is very important, that we have also a space, safe space, where the people have a say in those structure.
First Nations Child and Family Caring Society Executive Director Cindy Blackstock says she supports the report and its recommendations, but that an Indigenous ombudsperson and tribunal must have at least the powers of the CHRT and probably more.
You need to have real teeth in those orders to be able to force change. Because even when governments make statements that they want things like Jordan's Principle to be implemented, which was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission's top call to action, sometimes that doesn't actually manifest on the ground. And despite, you're wanting to feel like when they know there's a problem, they'll fix it, that doesn't always happen.
APTN News reached out to Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Gary Anasandagri for comment. In an emailed response, his office says it welcomes the report and will be reviewing accordingly. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A heated battle between opposing sides to the open net fish farm debate is erupting on the West Coast. APTN's Tina House has more on this story.
Last June, the federal government announced the closure of open net fish farms in BC.
The open net farms will be fully terminated in terms of operations within 5 years.
The news came as a welcome gesture from the Wild Salmon Alliance that have been fighting to shut down these farms from what they say is contamination to wild salmon stocks.
When the Wild Salmon Alliance began to inform First Nations of the rationale for being supportive of the removal, it's based upon fact. It's based upon federal court rulings, the Auditor General's reporting, on the Cohen Commission's report, on the Standing Committee of Fisheries and Oceans, and most recently the judicial review that came out on the Discovery Islands decisions.
But on November the 28th, tensions boiled over at a press conference in Ottawa, where the First Nations for Fin Fish Stewardship and their allies were there to demand the government reconsider their decision to shut down open net fish farms.
They're listening to activists and ministers like Jonathan Wilkinson, who are continuing to interfere with our rights and self-determination. There's a difference between activists and conservationists. First Nations have rights and title, and they work with conservation communities to protect valuable lands and resources within our territories. Activists simply point out problems that exist.
There's no question.
17 hereditary chiefs immediately held their own press conference in Vancouver to respond to those remarks.
This is not true. In the Broughton Archipelago, many of the hereditary chiefs that are standing with me today were the ones that made the decision to remove the farms from our traditional waters. To characterize them as activists is completely and utterly offensive. You see, today there are coppers with our hereditary chiefs. They have fulfilled their obligations in the culture of our people to stand up and look after our territories for generations to come.
Dallas Smith spoke to APTN by Zoom.
To be called out in a press conference by chiefs who all have my cell phone number, who drove past my office on the way to Vancouver to have said press conference, is really a dangerous precedent. You know, it's really important that we look at all these issues and understand the role of hereditary leadership on a community by community basis. But to sit here and call each other out personally is just not really going to be beneficial of good results.
Smith also states that over 5,000 people depend on the aquaculture sector and is concerned that his communities do not have the power to sustain land-based operations. However, the federal government is still moving ahead with full closure of open net fish farms by 2029. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
Days after the Manitoba Métis Federation and Canada signed their self-government treaty, 2 Dakota First Nations in Manitoba launched a legal challenge against it. Reporter Sierra Bettens takes a closer look.
On November 30th in Winnipeg, Manitoba Métis Federation President David Chartrand and Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Gary Anandasangri signed the Red River Métis Self-Government and Implementation Treaty. It recognizes the MMF as the government of the Red River Métis and affirms its internal lawmaking powers for its citizenship.
This treaty sets the stone solid. It carves the pathway to ensure and enshrine that our government will be recognized. I am not a group. I am not an organization. I'm not an advocacy group. I am a government. And that's what they need to understand.
However, on December 2nd, the Dakota Teepee and Chinoopookpa First Nations filed an injunction against it. The MMF and the Attorney General of Canada are named as respondents. The Dakotas argue that the treaty is constitutionally invalid and that Canada and the Red River Métis failed to consult them. They demand an injunction prohibiting the MMF from making land and resource claims without consulting them. In a phone interview with APTN, Dakota Teepee Chief Dennis Pache said the injunction asserts their rights.
Not any animosity or anything, it's just that the government is neglecting Dakota people. They did give us an apology July 15th of this year, but they've refused to meet with us or are not wanting to work with us to implement what that means.
MMF Minister Will Goodon said the Dakota injunction was disappointing and that it asserts a false hierarchy of rights.
I think that there's misconceptions out there that in the Constitution there is a hierarchy, that there is different levels of rights, and different nations have different constitutional rights, which isn't true.
The injunction is the second legal action the Dakotas have launched against the MMF this year. On October 11th, Dakota Teepee and Chinupawakpa filed a statement of claim against the MMF, Manitoba, and Canada's Attorney General, alleging they were excluded from land and resource consultations. It called for a distinctions-based approach to Indigenous rights.
So we were here based on a distinctions-based process of time. Who was here 12,000 years ago, who was here 1,000, who was here, and so forth. And that's a process that's been used in British Columbia.
Goodon agrees that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit must be recognized as distinct and urges Canada to deliver on treaty obligations.
Going back to Louis Riel, when he negotiated our entry into Confederation, he made sure that in the talks was that Canada needed to sign treaties with First Nations. So we're going back to those days, and we still agree that Canada needs to fulfill its obligations to all Indigenous peoples.
The Red River Métis Treaty does not include harvesting or land rights. Section 95 discusses the procedures to be taken if the treaty infringes on the rights of other Indigenous peoples, which includes a 3-step dispute process. Goodon said consultations with First Nations on the treaty were the Crown's duty, not the MMF's. In a statement sent to APTN, Jacinth Goulet, speaking for Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, said the treaty included over a year of consultations with other Indigenous groups, including First Nations in Manitoba, before it was finalized. She said Canada is now reviewing the motion. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Indigenous youth in Manitoba were among those honored this past week. Details on that coming up after the break. Welcome back. A diverse group of citizens in Manitoba were awarded with the King Charles III Coronation Medals on Tuesday for their service to the province, among them a number of Indigenous youth. Among the recipients were Cambria Harris and Jordan Myron, who were leading voices in the Search the Landfill movement, not just for their mother and sister, but for all MMIWG2S+ people. Métis fiddler Grace Ginter was also a recipient. She performed in June at the 80th anniversary of D-Day in Normandy. Janessa Dumas, a 15-year-old from Matthias Colombe Nation, was also honored. She was diagnosed with stage 4 kidney disease at the age of 7 and received a kidney transplant in 2020. She's now the Children's Hospital of Manitoba champion.
And then Janessa, the champion child, raising money for other kids who have to go to the Children's Hospital. And to see the first event we were at, the shy young woman from Puckatawagan, to now see the bold, confident, poised public speaker that you've become over the course of your year, it's amazing. And so I'm so proud of everything that you've done.
Congrats to all of those who were honored. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this weekend. Of course, for news anytime, you can always visit our website, aptnnews.ca. And Creason will be here Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern for your first look at the week's news. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech. Thanks for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.